Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Boss Economics World, where we cut through the government spin, the Wall Street fluff, and the Fed's fairy tales to bring you the raw, unfiltered truth about what's really happening in the economy. I'm your host, the no-nonsense, number-crunching, policy-bashing voice of reason, here to expose the economic dumpster fire that our so-called leaders have ignited. Buckle up, because today, we're diving headfirst into the latest jobs report from June 2025, a report so riddled with smoke and mirrors, it might as well have been written by a magician. Let's roll. Oh, look, the headlines are screaming, U.S. job growth smashes expectations in June 2025. Payrolls up 147,000, unemployment down to 4.1%, and the stock market doing backflips like it just won the lottery. Sounds like a party, right? Wrong. Folks, this is what we at Boss Economics World call lipstick on a pig. Dig a little deeper, and you'll see this jobs report is a masterclass in government sleight of hand, propped up by temporary public sector gimmicks while the private sector, the real engine of the economy, is sputtering like a beat-up old jalopy on its last fumes. Let's break this down, point by point, surface to core, and expose the economic rot that the government and their cronies at the Fed are desperately trying to hide. By the end of this, you'll see why this so-called economic recovery is nothing but a house of cards, teetering on the edge of collapse, all thanks to the mismanagement, incompetence, and outright recklessness of our dear leaders in Washington. First up, let's talk about the big, shiny number driving this report, 147,000 new jobs. Sounds impressive, right? But here's the kicker, nearly half of those jobs, folks, came from state and local government payrolls, particularly in public education. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS, state government payrolls surged by the most since early 2023, with local governments following suit. Wow, talk about a convenient boost just in time to juice up the headlines. But hold on a sec, several economists, including the sharp minds at Pantheon Macroeconomics, are calling foul. They're pointing to seasonal adjustment issues as the likely culprit behind this public sector hiring spree. Translation: these numbers are probably inflated, folks. Public education jobs. Come on, we all know those are often temporary, seasonal, or part-time gigs tied to academic calendars, not exactly the kind of stable, long-term employment that signals a booming economy. And here's the real gut punch: while the government is busy padding the stats with public sector fluff, private payrolls, the true measure of economic health, grew by a measly 74,000, the weakest since October 2024. That's less than half the headline number. Healthcare was the only bright spot, adding 59,000 jobs, but even that was the smallest gain in 4 months. Meanwhile, manufacturing, wholesale trade, and business services all lost jobs. Folks, this isn't job growth, this is a private sector on life support, with the government desperately pumping in artificial oxygen to keep the patient alive. Now, let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture. Why is private sector hiring so anemic? Oh, I don't know, maybe it has something to do with President Donald Trump's erratic, bull-in-a-China-shop trade policies. You know, the ones where he slaps tariffs on everything from Chinese semiconductors to Canadian lumber, then tweets about it at 3 a.m. like a teenager hyped up on energy drinks. According to Samuel Toombs, chief U.S. economist at Pantheon Macroeconomics, the tariff tax hike, restrictive monetary policy, and worries about a further intensification of the trade war are weighing heavily on labor demand. Let's get real here, folks. Tariffs are taxes, plain and simple. And who pays them? Not China, not Mexico, not Canada, you do. American businesses, workers, and consumers are the ones getting squeezed. Just look at the data. The U.S. trade deficit widened in May 2025, according to a separate BLS report, after a record plunge in imports the prior month. Why? Because businesses are scaling back, hoarding cash, and bracing for the next round of Trump's trade war roulette. And when businesses hunker down, they don't hire, they freeze. Hence, the pathetic 74,000 private sector jobs added in June. Oh, and let's not forget the uncertainty around Trump's signature tax legislation, which is still languishing in Congress. Businesses hate uncertainty, folks. They're not going to ramp up hiring when they don't even know what their tax bill will look like next year, or whether they'll get slapped with another 25% tariff on their supply chain. This is economic mismanagement 101, courtesy of the Trump administration. Now, let's turn our sights on the Federal Reserve, the grand wizards of monetary policy who seem to think watching paint dry is a viable strategy for managing a slowing economy. Fed Chair Jerome Powell, in his infinite wisdom, told lawmakers that there's no rush to cut interest rates until there's more clarity on how tariffs are affecting inflation. Really, Jerome? No rush? Tell that to the millions of Americans who are seeing their job prospects dry up, their wages stagnate, and their cost of living soar. Here's the deal, folks, the Fed's restrictive monetary policy, keeping interest rates elevated, is like pouring concrete on an already sluggish economy. High borrowing costs discourage businesses from investing, hiring, and expanding. And guess what? The jobs report proves it. Average hourly earnings grew by just 0.2% month-over-month in June 2025, and 3.7% year-over-year, the weakest annual gain since July 2024. The workweek shrank, too, signaling that employers are cutting hours, not adding jobs. This is what happens when the Fed sits on its hands, pretending everything's fine while the labor market cools faster than a popsicle in a deep freezer. And don't let the stock market's reaction fool you. Treasury yields rose and the S&P 500 climbed after the jobs report, supposedly because it took pressure off the Fed to cut rates. Oh, please. The stock market isn't the economy, folks, it's a casino for Wall Street fat cats, fueled by cheap debt and speculative bubbles. Meanwhile, Main Street is getting crushed, and the Fed is too busy navel-gazing to notice. But wait, there's more. Let's talk about the Trump administration's latest brainchild, what he's calling the largest mass deportation of undocumented immigrants in history. Sounds like a great plan, right? Wrong. This isn't just a humanitarian crisis in the making, it's an economic catastrophe waiting to happen. Why? Because foreign-born workers have been a major driver of U.S. job growth in recent years. According to Thursday's BLS data, the size of the foreign-born labor force declined for the third straight month in June 2025, hitting the lowest level this year. Over the past 3 months, the foreign-born labor force has shrunk by the most since 2007, outside of the pandemic. Let's connect the dots, folks. Undocumented immigrants aren't just taking jobs, they're filling critical labor shortages in industries like agriculture, construction, and hospitality. Kick them out, and you don't just lose workers, you lose consumers, taxpayers, and economic activity. The Congressional Budget Office, CBO, estimated in 2024 that immigrants, both legal and undocumented, contributed $1.1 trillion to U.S. GDP annually. Deporting millions of them? That's like taking a sledgehammer to the economy's foundation, all for the sake of a political stunt. And who's going to feel the pain? Small businesses, rural communities, and, you guessed it, the average American worker. Oh, and let's not forget the cherry on top of this economic dumpster fire, inequality. The jobs report showed the unemployment rate for Black Americans spiked to 6.8% in June 2025, the highest since early 2022. Compare that to the overall unemployment rate of 4.1%, and you've got a glaring racial disparity that the government is doing nothing to address. This isn't just a statistic, folks, it's a crisis. Black workers are disproportionately stuck in low-wage, precarious jobs, and when the economy slows, they're the first to get hit. Meanwhile, the Trump administration is too busy slapping tariffs and deporting workers to care about policies that could actually help, like targeted job training programs or infrastructure investments. So, let's tie this all together, folks. What does this jobs report really tell us? It tells us the economy is slowing, the private sector is stalling, and the government is papering over the cracks with public sector gimmicks. It tells us that Trump's trade wars, deportation fantasies, and tax policy limbo are killing business confidence and labor demand. It tells us the Fed is asleep at the wheel, refusing to cut rates even as warning signs, like surging jobless claims and a shrinking labor force participation rate, flash red. And it tells us that inequality is getting worse, with marginalized communities bearing the brunt of this economic mess. Here's the ugly truth, folks, we're on the brink of a recession, and it's not if, but when. The Conference Board's Consumer Confidence Survey shows the gap between people saying jobs are plentiful versus hard to get is the smallest since March 2021. Recurring jobless claims are at their highest since late 2021. And let's not forget the yield curve inversion, a classic recession predictor, that flashed again in early 2025, according to Bloomberg data. All the signs are there, but the government is too busy playing politics to do anything about it. Here at Boss Economics World, we don't sugarcoat the truth. This economy is a mess, and it's a mess because of the clowns running the show in Washington. Trump's trade tantrums, deportation disasters, and legislative gridlock are strangling the private sector. The Fed's refusal to act is pouring fuel on the fire. And the result? A labor market on life support, wages stagnating, and inequality soaring, all while the government tries to fool us with puffed-up public sector stats. So, what's the fix? First, ditch the tariffs and stop treating trade policy like a reality TV show. Second, scrap the deportation madness and embrace sensible immigration reform that fills labor shortages without demonizing workers. Third, get the Fed off its high horse and cut rates before the economy tanks. And finally, invest in real job creation, think infrastructure, green energy, and targeted training programs, not temporary public sector fluff. But hey, don't hold your breath, folks. As long as these jokers are in charge, we're stuck on this economic roller coaster, and the only direction is down. That's all for today, folks. If you're as fed up with this economic nonsense as I am, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and share this video with everyone you know. Let's send a message to Washington, we're not buying your spin anymore. Until next time, this is Boss Economics World, keeping it real, keeping it raw, and always fighting for the little guy. Peace out.